Hello, parents. How are you? I am so happy to see you again. So today, we are going to continue our conversation on conscious boundaries that I began yesterday. But today we're going to go a little deeper and try to understand how do we apply them. You know, when you hear the word boundary, you probably assume I'm talking about giving our children boundaries. However, you know by now that all my work always begins and ends with you. You know, I'm actually less concerned with our children's understanding of boundaries, and I'm more deeply concerned about us parents understanding our own internal boundaries. I can share with you that one of my biggest struggles with my daughter to this day is my incapacity, utter incapacity to know my own internal boundaries. And I believe it is with many parents. You know, whenever our children get out of line, it's not so much, really, and this is the truth, it's not so much that they are out of line because they're bad or they're evil or they're defiant. It's really that they're out of line because this is what they're meant to do. They are human beings. They have their own opinions, their own mindsets. Of course, they're going to be out of line. They're supposed to challenge our rules and our structures. After all, they are growing, exploring, expanding beings. How can they not? How can we just expect them to just naturally be obedient and know how to follow our ways? The integral question to ask is not, why did my kid mess up? That's not the right question to ask. Neither is it the right question to ask, what punishment can I give them? The right question to ask is, how can I most consciously respond to this mess up in the most powerful, empowering way? How can I create the right conditions in the environment that can help my child align their behaviors to my greater vision more appropriately? We need to ask, were my communications messed up? Or were my conditions messed up? Because often it's us in the laying of the conditions, in the communication of our vision, that things go awry. You know, I always say that I don't want to control my child. I only want to control the conditions around my child. So I truly believe that if we as parents keep our focus on creating conscious conditions in the house, for example, if you're upset every day that your kid eats the cookies, instead of being upset with them and disciplining them, think to yourself, how can I co-create the right conditions in my house? And then perhaps you'll just take all the cookies out of your house. You see, the focus then is less on blaming the kids, and it is more on us taking responsibility for the energy with which we set up the conditions, whether our children will fail or succeed. The main reason, and I know you may not like to hear this, but the main reason our children are confused about boundaries is because our boundaries are confusing. We are confused about them. We are wishy-washy about them ourselves. Our children are not the ones to blame. It's because our boundaries aren't clearly drawn in our own mind, in our own heart, and we have an inability to focus, to make sure they're executed appropriately, and to lay clear limits. It's us who don't know when and how much. And it is this confusion that inevitably creates resistance in our children, and they begin to manipulate the wishy-washy boundaries that we set. So the conscious parenting way changes the focus on blaming the kid and begins to ask the parent, how have I created boundaries that sets my kid up for a misalignment? You know, we parents, we think we're being clear, but we just don't realize how many mixed messages we're sending. You know, when we're busy, we send them to their iPad. When we're doing our work and don't want to be disturbed, we're like, go watch TV, go watch TV. But the moment we've decided that it's enough, then we just carte blanche, take it away from them. And this confuses our children. You know, there's no clear guideline. There's no clear order of things. It's always up to the arbitrary whims and fancies of us, the parent. No wonder our children retaliate and rebel. Ultimately, it all boils down to our own inner hypocrisy. We don't have clear boundaries. We are not embodying the boundaries. And because we aren't embodying them, we cannot have them with our children. I always tell parents, you cannot set a boundary that you yourself don't have in your own life. You cannot talk about eating gluten-free or eating no sugar when late at night you're digging into the fridge and sneaking all that sugar in. Our children pick up on our ambivalence. They pick up on our hypocrisy. And this leads them to feel confused. And when they're confused, they begin to act out. So in essence, really, conscious boundaries are not something you give, and they're not even something you do. They are something you consciously choose to live. Your physical and energetic embodiment of the boundary. Now that's what's going to get absorbed by your children. So the next time your kid acts bad, instead of projecting all this blame onto them, now I want you to realize that it's you who did not set the boundary clearly. The more easily and clearly you set the boundary, the more clearly and easily your children will absorb the right way to be. When we parents begin to cultivate the skill to create clear, consistent, compassionate boundaries, allowing our children to fumble and stumble, it is then that the entire need and imperative for discipline falls to the wayside, and the entire tone of the interaction between parent and child changes. It's no longer the dictator ordering the minion. Now it is two people who deeply understand and desire to connect with each other. So whether we like to accept it or not, mastering the art of setting boundaries is essentially a task the parent needs to undertake, and it is the path toward greater harmony. So you have to ask yourself, as a burgeoning conscious parent, am I ready to own the responsibility that the setting of the boundaries starts and ends with me? We have to accept a really important point that I'm about to communicate to you, that the reason we can't stick with a boundary and the reason we don't really institute a boundary is because every parent is afraid of the tremendous fallout. We know the moment we say no to our children, there's going to be an uproar, a temper tantrum, an outburst of anger on the part of our children. And every parent is afraid of that. And that's why, because we are afraid of the fallout, that's why we don't really lay the boundary. So as a conscious parent, we must explore, why are we so afraid of the fallout? Of course our children are going to protest. Does that mean we renege on the boundary? No. If the boundary is truly for their best interests, then we must always try as best as we can to be consistent, clear, and preemptive. So some boundaries are truly in the best interest of our children, and I call those boundaries life-enhancing boundaries, whereas others, they actually only serve our ego, and I call those ego-enhancing boundaries. Life-enhancing boundaries help our children cope with life. They strengthen their resilience. They help enable them to feel secure. Part of the general order of things, these boundaries help our children develop into well-rounded citizens of the world. Their boundaries around their hygiene, around their sense of connection to themselves or their community, their sleeping, their literacy, going to school, these things are truly for our children's best interests. So when we institute them, we need to understand these are for their blossoming. When we're clear that what we are imposing on our children is truly for their best interests, as I've just outlined, that they are truly to enhance our children's life, then there should be no ambivalence about setting the boundary. If they have to go to school to become literate, then they have to go to school. So when you hold the vision that this is truly for my child's best interest, then let's be clear. Let's be consistent. Let's hold the limit. On the other hand, there are all these boundaries that are ego-enhancing. All our activities that we impose on our children, piano, baseball, learning another extra language, skiing, anything that's not truly for their core life skills, we can put in the category of optional. And because they're optional, they do serve the ego, either the ego of the child or the ego of the parent. And it doesn't mean that those activities are bad. It's just that we need to be clear that those are optional. And for all optional things, I always encourage the parent to release that boundary if it's creating too much dysfunction or disconnection. So now for today's task, I want you to really scrutinize one or two areas in your life that you and your kids keep clashing. Really bring that on the petri dish under your microscope, your spiritual and emotional microscope. I want you to examine why you're having a clash. Is it because you are trying to mandate an optional boundary and you're pretending it's a life-enhancing boundary? Or is what you're trying to impose truly for the benefit of the child? Now be honest with yourself. Is what you're trying to do serving your ego in any way? Be aware, be clear. And then the second thing I want you to focus on is how you go about instituting this boundary. Are you acting as if this boundary is a stone boundary? It's a life or death? Or is this boundary more a sand boundary, up for negotiation? And if it is up for negotiation, ask yourself, why aren't you negotiating with your kid? Let me tell you why. Because if you do negotiate with your kids, the chances of their buy-in is much higher, and the chances for success is infinite. So examine your boundaries, examine your motivations, examine your hidden agendas, expose them to the light of your conscious awareness. Share your thoughts, and I will see you back here again tomorrow.